Hi everyone, this is Rossi and with another lesson in beginning drawing. In this lesson, we're going to go over translating a thumbnail onto our larger sheet of paper. We're going to talk about gesture, organizational line, citing, contour line, and cross contour. And we're going to be drawing a pear today that you can see here. We're going to be working on 18 by 24 drawing paper. I have a piece of newsprint here with my thumbnails that I'll talk about in a second. And we're going to be using graphite pencils today, and we're going to be using B, 2B, 4B, and 6B pencils. Now your pencils go up in softness. So your B pencil, it's a pretty soft pencil, but that one is less soft than the 2B. The 2B is softer. And by softer, that lead, because it's softer, it's going to be darker. So 2B is darker than B, 4B is darker than 2B, 6B is darker than 4B. Okay, so let me show you the paper and we'll get started. So I'm working on drawing paper. Let me see if I can get the paper in the camera view. Drawing paper, 18 by 24, Strathmore brand. Drawing paper is better for this than sketch paper. The paper itself is a little higher quality and it has just a little bit of a tooth, a little bit of a texture to it. It's less smooth. In my last video, we did thumbnails. So we decided on the composition that I would do for this drawing. And I decided on this version where I'm looking at the back of the pear, and you can see the pear is already in that position. In order for me to keep in mind where my thumbnail is, I'm actually going to put it at the very top of my paper. So I'm just going to fold this in half so that it stays in our view. Let's see if I can get it. And I'm going to make the same landscape ratio thumbnail up here in the little corner of my paper. And I have an idea of what I want my thumbnail to be, but I'm not going to draw the thumbnail from my newsprint. When I start drawing here, I'm going to look at the object again because things might have changed. I actually turned the pear the other direction because I thought it would be a better composition. So the little bottom, the butt of my pear is actually not in the same spot the composition is, but the pear is in a different place. So let's see if I can make it so you guys can see what I'm drawing. So I'm going to redraw that thumbnail, thinking about where I positioned it to begin with, but looking directly at the object again, rather than working off the thumbnail itself. I'm looking at the big bulbous part of that pear, thinking about how the neck comes into it, that the stem is pointing downward, that I'm going to be drawing some of this paper towel to create a compositional element to it, and maybe even that there's a shadow that's a part of that. And let's get that little part of the pear in there as well. So I want to make sure that thumbnails are gestural. So thumbnails shouldn't take you very long. They should be like 10 to 30-second drawings that are capturing the entire essence of the subject, in this case, the pear. So now that I have this, I'm going to put my thumbnails away. I don't need them. They've done their purpose. They've told me how I'm going to position my artwork on my paper. And now what I want to look at in terms of my thumbnail as it comes to the paper itself is it tells me how I should place my objects within the paper. So what I understand from this thumbnail is that the pear is going to be about probably a fourth of the way down on the page itself, and probably a little bit less than that up from the edge of the paper. So when I come to the paper itself, I know that I want that pear to start about here. That's what that top part of the paper is telling me. That's why the ratio of the paper is important. And then from the bottom, if I look at the bottom of the paper, how far up should that circle go? Let's see if I can get my paper in view it's a little bit bigger than, there we go. I'll be moving this around just a little bit. Once we start going, it should be a little bit easier to see, but the bottom of the paper should be somewhere around there. I'm gonna just bring it back. There we go. And then I'm gonna look at the side. So I want from the edge of the paper, thinking about where that edge of the pear is gonna be. It's something around here. And then it's pretty big. It's about a third of the way in from this edge of my paper. So that space here is pretty big. So my pear should actually fit within this space. So the thumbnail has allowed me to decide how I'm going to place this object onto the paper itself. So now I'm basically finished with the thumbnail. It's kind of done what it's supposed to. Now I have to start looking at the object again and really paying attention to its proportions. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use sighting, and I'm going to measure what is the width of this pear compared to the height of this pear. And as you can see, where I'm using my pencil to the top of my pencil at the top of the pear and the thumb at the bottom, this measurement and this measurement are pretty close to the same. It's just slightly wider than it is tall. So I want to make sure that that's the same in terms of what I've drawn here. I can use my pencil to measure that. So this is once the width of my pencil. This is almost twice the width of my pencil. And I can see that that is about, what I noticed is that it was just slightly wider than it was tall, but maybe it wasn't quite as much. So if this is the height of the pear, about 1 1/4 of my pencil, then it should be about the same going in this direction. So let's continue with sighting. I want to look at this bulbous part of the pear, this part that we can kind of see as almost a circle. What is its height, versus its width? We know that they're almost the same. So what is the, so when does the circular part of that end? Like, where does that circle kind of end? And it's almost a little bit under half. So if I think about this width, I'm thinking, when does this big circular part of the pear terminate? Like, where does it stop? And in terms of this width, it's about halfway is what I'm seeing. That if I take this measurement, about halfway on that measurement is where this circular part of the pear kind of ends. So this bulbous big part of the pear is going to take up about this space. And I'm going to, what I've been doing is I've been using sighting to measure that space. And now I'm kind of basically using a gesture and a little bit of organizational line, which are these kind of marks that I've measured in order to lay out the size of the pear and what I see. Now, the neck of the pear, we can really think about it as an ellipse that's going into this circle. So that's kind of its most basic form. Now we know that the edge of that form isn't quite like that. And we're actually going to clean that up in a second, but it's really made up of a circle and an ellipse. That's what that pear is made from. And we call this, again, organizational line, where we're using really simple geometric forms in order to get the correct height and width of this pear. And then we know that the stem of this pear is going to be sitting out here, and that the paper napkin is going to be a part of that composition. We're going to see a little edge of it coming in the other direction and going towards the left. So far, we did our thumbnail, we did some sighting, we did some organizational line. And now we have to use contour line. A contour line is a slow, meticulous line that moves in and out of the form. It captures all patterns, wrinkles, and other elements of the form itself. The one thing contour line is not, it's not an outline. But when we're doing a contour line, we want to work with almost a non-interrupted line, a line that you continue to have contact with the piece of paper the entire time you're drawing. And it's really not a sketchy line. So like I was drawing these circles, they're pretty sketchy line. With contour line, I'm gonna slow down and make a clean, continuous line. I'm gonna start here. Let's see if you guys can see. And I actually want to think about what is the slope in which I see this pear going up, because it's not really a circle all the way around. This one starts to slope upward and then it decreases that slope and then it almost flattens out and then it reverses and starts to slope downward. So I'm going to work on creating a line that's similar to that. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to think about its slope, how it's curving. Every time I'm thinking about how that form is changing, I'm gonna just take my pencil and pause how it's going around that pear. Now, this was just an indication of how that form looked, but the pear itself doesn't have this indent. Instead, it just starts to slope more quickly towards the stem. It does something like this, and in my view, I think that pear is actually just a little bit shorter than what I've originally drawn. It slopes back to the left, it flattens out, it comes down. Now with contour line, I can also go in because, again, it's kind of these two different forms, this circle and the neck, which is almost an ellipse. And the circle, that butt of the pear kind of goes into that form, and we can see that, and we can start to capture that with contour line. And then it's going back up and connecting. I don't think that my line here is quite that dramatic. And now I also want to come in and think about where is the little, like, I don't know what else to call it, the little butt of the pear. I'm sure that there's a very technical term for what that part of the pear is actually called, but the bottom of the pear always looks like a little butt to me. And I'm gonna draw the stem with contour line, really thinking about the angle in which I see it, how it starts to slope downward, and capturing that stem. With contour line, I can also draw in all the shadows that I see, which will help us to make all these forms feel like they're three-dimensional. It's doing something like that. I actually see the edge of the napkin this way, which is slightly off of the camera view. The edge of the napkin in this other direction. And sticking up here. Okay, so now I have, what I've done is I've done the thumbnail, I've used citing and organizational line, measured the height and width of the pear, drawn its basic shapes, refined the edges of the pear using contour. For this lesson plan, we also want to do cross contour. And cross contour are imaginary lines, kind of like latitude and longitude on a globe, that describe the form of the pear and how it's sloping. So if we were to imagine that we would draw a line that goes from one pole, or like the butt of the pear, all the way over to its stem, what would that line look like? Where would it curve in order to show the volumetric nature of this big bulbous part of the pear and how it curves up and then it kind of curves down, goes around this neck, which is a little bit flatter and connects back to the stem. Also, what does that look like when we go in this direction? So both vertically and horizontally, or from pole to pole, latitude, longitude is the way I think about it. And we want to kind of put a grid on the pear itself, which will help us once we start adding value. And value will be the next video for this. So let's start. So here, when I look at the butt of the pear, there's little indentations already that kind of help me start to imagine that if I take that line and start to follow it over the curved part of the pear, it would curve upward, then it would curve down, maybe almost disappear around the edge of this form, flatten out, and start to curve towards the neck. And I'm gonna do another one. I wanna put them about 1/2 inch to an inch apart. I don't recommend you going any further away from each other than that. And that's really at their widest points because they'll all start at the very edge, very interior, that part of the butt of the pear, and will kind of star out of that form, just like again, thinking about one of the poles of the earth on a globe. All those lines are going to get really close to each other when it comes to the North Pole or the South Pole. When you're making these lines and they are ending at the edge, you don't want to just make them straight. That doesn't really make sense. That line would continue and it would curve and disappear. So you want to make sure that these lines are curving rather than ending in a straight line. So I've done the cross contour in one direction, and you can see that it's starting to make this feel very full, very big and bulbous like it is. And then we're going to go in the other direction, thinking about, again, longitude and latitude. I'm thinking about how that pear is bumpy. If you're ever wondering, gosh, I don't know if I can see it, I don't really know like when it should be like bumping up and down, it's easy to just touch the object and really think about, okay, my hand is definitely going up, and then it's starting to curve down, and then it indents in, it goes up again, and then it goes down again. So just touching the object can help you start to understand how this latitude and longitude, which again we call cross contour, can happen. And yes, contour and cross contour share a name, but cross contour is really about this curvature, and really thinking about the curvature of forms, but it's still using a slow continuous line that has a similar line quality to contour line. So that's why they're similar. So here I have my pear laid out on my larger drawing paper. Again, we used a thumbnail, we used sighting to measure the pole, which you do by holding your pencil at arm's length and measuring its height and width, as well as other elements of it. You always want to make sure that you're measuring vertically and horizontally. I'll have another lesson about sighting in a different video. Then we started with organizational line. We thought about its height and width. We used a contour line to describe its edges, as well as starting to go into the pear, creating that butt of the pear. And then we used cross contour to describe its volumetric nature.